Good morning, afternoon, and evening. A warm welcome to this webinar dedicated to information management in support of accountability to affected population, or AAP for its acronym in English, which is basically our foremost responsibility as humanitarians. This webinar will include 5 parts, among which we will cover the fundamentals of accountability to crisis-affected populations and the pivotal role of information management in the accountability process. The second part will provide an in-depth overview of AAP throughout the humanitarian program cycle, or HPC. The third part will focus on data responsibility, while the fourth part will be a feedback loop based on example from the field. Finally, the last part will be open to your questions and feedback. If you're watching the recording, please feel free to comment your question in the dedicated space or send an email to the addresses indicated at the end of the presentation. This webinar is open to OCHA staff as well as internal and external partners and is scheduled to last an hour. Our esteemed presenters of the day are respectively Mr. Pedro Fiere, who is the Information and Knowledge Management Advisor for the Interagency Standing Committee Accountability to Affected People Task Force, and Mr. Joseph Arawe, Information Management Officer with the OCHA hat in Philippines. Please do not hesitate to contact the Ask Help Desk team if you have any question about accountability to affected population. Without further delay, we will now begin with the presentation of our colleague Pedro, whom we are very honored to have with us today.
Thank you so much, Manu. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you so much to everyone online who managed to take time of their busy schedules to join us in this conversation today. As mentioned, I'm the Information and Knowledge Management Advisor to the Interagency Standing Committee Task Force 2 on Accountability to Affected People. And in the next hour, we'll be sharing with you what is AAP and how we, IMOs, can contribute to its success. The final goal is to foster a common language and understanding of information management in support of AAP, as well as to provide examples of specific IM products and tools that can be used to strengthen the AAP. There will be not enough time to dwell on the technicalities of the different products, but you will have access to plenty of useful resources, as well as to where to go if you need support in the future. With me today, we also have Joseph Adawe, that was already introduced. Just wanted to say thanks a million, Joseph, to accepting the invite to join me today. And we will delve right into the presentation. I would like to start by sharing a quote from the IASC Principles Statement on AAP. The IASC Principles are the heads of all UN agencies and INGOs that work on humanitarian action, and they clearly recognize the central role of AAP, as you can see. So let's recap then, what is AAP after all? AAP is the active commitment by humanitarian actors to use power responsibly, to take account of, give account to, and be held to account by people affected by crisis. The 3 pillars of accountability as shown here. By holding aid workers to account, we mean protecting affected people from all forms of exploitation and abuse, including sexual exploitation and abuse, slave labor, human trafficking, fraud, corruption, environmental damage, and any other form of abuse of power. By giving account, we mean actively providing information about the humanitarian response, its programs and actors, the humanitarian principles and code of conduct, the mechanisms available for communities to participate, provide feedback and complain, as well as the humanitarian funding and the target criteria of the different programs, among others. By taking account, we mean that affected people in all their diversity are recognized and included as equal participants in the decision-making process throughout the entire humanitarian program cycle. In parallel, anyone shall be able to comment or submit complaints about the performance of the humanitarian response and any of its actors. This feedback is acted upon and the response is adjusted accordingly. Always bearing in mind that affected people are not a homogeneous group and that different and often marginalized parts of the societies, such as different gender and age groups, ethnic minorities, persons with disability, etc., must be proactively and meaningfully included in the humanitarian programs and their priorities reflected adequately. That is why community engagement, inclusion, and localization are cross-cutting enablers of the overall accountability effort. This means that AAP is not a thematic area that some specialists do on the side. It is rather a philosophy of work that every humanitarian should strive to implement across all areas of work, whether it is health, child protection, shelter, or anything else. OCHA, as a coordination agency by mandate, has a dual role in AAP. It must ensure accountability by its own staff and activities, but also support the humanitarian coordinators, ensuring that collective accountability of the entire humanitarian system. OCHA does this through 4 vectors of action: coordination, advocacy, financing, and information management. In coordination, OCHA supports humanitarian coordinators and humanitarian country teams, as well as intercluster coordination groups and other relevant coordination structures to ensure that international humanitarian action is people-driven, community-led, and accountable. This entails establishing interagency AAP working groups and related services when needed, and incorporating these in the response plans. In terms of advocacy, OCHA advocates for an effective and impact-oriented response that puts people and their needs at the center. This includes ensuring policy and advocacy are grounded in a strong evidence base of people's own experiences and their priority needs and preferences through, for example, community consultations, joint public information campaigns, and interagency complaints and feedback mechanisms. OCHA also supports the integration of AAP in OCHA-managed pool funds, SURF and CBPFs, ensuring projects include information provision, feedback, complaints, and participatory approaches in planning, implementation, and monitoring. In addition, OCHA promotes specific AAP envelopes to fund collective AAP initiatives. Lastly, in terms of information management, and that's why we are here today, OCHA supports the inclusion of feedback and perceptions from people of all gender, age, disability, and other diversities in analysis, planning, and monitoring, in order to ensure that affected people have a say in the way the humanitarian assistance is delivered to them. Another important aspect is the critical role that OCHA plays in contributing to effective interagency information management working groups and their support to the AAP working groups at the field level. So let's now see what does this mean in practice. To start, we would like to learn from your vast experience. So please enter the chat or the Q&A session and quickly try to answer this question. What IAM tools do you know or have you used to support AAP efforts?
And we have a first answer, the community feedback mechanism, CFM mapping.
Great.
And
Thank
4
you so
Ws
much.
and 5 Ws. Thank you, colleagues, for sharing your experience with those tools.
Thank you so much, indeed. So let's then see IAM in support of AAP throughout the humanitarian program cycle. Collective AAP generates a lot of data from a range of sources to achieve its goal, namely information collected from communities, such as assessment of needs and preferences, feedback and complaints, but also information that is provided directly to communities, such as selection criteria, program plans, or public health messaging. And also information that relates to the AAP actors and activities, such as presence mappings and contact databases, as well as information that relates to the context with AAP relevance, such as the media landscape, rumors and misinformation circulating within the communities, etc. all of which need to be effectively managed to ensure it is protected and used correctly. But how can we do that? To help us structure our thinking, I have decided to follow the humanitarian program cycle and look at which types of information management support, products, and tools might be needed at each one of its phases, as you can see here. Before delving into the products, let me caveat that not all information management officers are supposed to be able to deliver all of what is going to be discussed. Information management officers are rather expected to be able to advise on what products and tools can be used and connecting with the entity, specialist organization, or private company that is able to deliver them. That being said, on the preparedness phase, we aim to ascertain how is the context in which we might have to operate, what communication channels are available and preferable, as well as lay the foundations for emergency response. This means conducting media landscape mappings and communication analysis, language maps, community communication preferences baselines, mapping of local NGOs, CSOs, and other grassroots organizations, mapping of existing humanitarian information provision systems, as well as mapping of existing community feedback mechanisms. And lastly, establish standby long-term agreements with vendors to be activated in case of emergency. Let's see a couple of these in more detail. Here you can see two examples of media landscape mappings, one from Belarus and one from Burkina Faso, both of them created by the CDAC network. This type of product will provide the entire humanitarian community with insights on the preferences and most used channels in a specific context, which can then be leveraged to ensure more effective and efficient community engagement and communication across the different program areas. Another very useful product that can be done during the preparedness phase is mapping all the activity feedback mechanisms, as was mentioned already by our colleague, in a given context, whether they are project level, agency level, or already at the collective level. This will serve as foundation for more collective approaches to manage community feedback and to bring feedback insights to the clusters, the humanitarian country teams, in order to shape future program design and response planning. Moving to the needs assessment and analysis phase of the HPC, AAP teams need information management support on local radios coverage mapping, cell phone networks coverage mapping, electricity grid coverage mapping, needs assessments, whether they are rapid assessments or multi-sector ones, and data protection, impact assessments, and risk management. All of these will contribute to establish what are the best channels to engage with communities and what are the different vulnerable groups' expressed needs and priorities. Let's see a couple of these in more detail. Allow me to start with the needs assessments themselves and use them to demonstrate how accountability must be seen as a multidimensional exercise. The basic approach, first dimension, is to include the so-called AAP questions into the assessment questionnaire. The ASC, together with REACH, developed a menu of questions to support this, as you can see on the right. The second dimension is including the affected people in the design of the survey, checking if the questions are understandable and acceptable and if we are missing something important. The third dimension is ensuring that the questionnaire is then applied to a representative sampling. Having the right questions is not enough. We need to ask them to the right people. This includes representativeness of vulnerable groups, such as children, women, older persons, persons living with disabilities, ethnic minorities, LGBTQI+, etc. Another dimension is ensuring that the pool of data collectors, enumerators, if you will, is diverse enough in terms of language, age, gender, ethnicity, etc., and adjusted to the context so that information can be collected without obstacles. We know that in some contexts, women are only allowed to talk to other women, or someone from a specific clan would refuse to talk to someone from a rival clan, for example. The fifth dimension is safeguarding that data collectors are trained to handle unsolicited sensitive feedback, such as allegations of exploitation and abuse. Yet another dimension is guaranteeing that the survey results are presented in a disaggregated enough way to favor the identification of vulnerable group level insights. The seventh and last dimension, apologies if this sounds like a Star Wars universe, is going back to the communities and validating the results before using them in the humanitarian response planning. Another very important line of products in the needs assessment and analysis phase are the coverage mappings. When a crisis hits, whether it is a cyclone or a conflict, critical infrastructure is usually affected. Hence, it is important to map the electricity, radio, and cell phone networks in order to update the media landscape mappings that were conducted during the preparedness phase, so that the humanitarian community knows what are the best channels to communicate with affected people. On the screen, you can see a couple of examples. The Humanitarian Connectivity Needs and Usage Assessment Toolkit from GSMA, an example of cell phone networks coverage from Uganda, a screenshot of our HDX page where Meta's electrical distribution grid maps are available, and an example of critical infrastructure mapping in Ukraine, available online at the Open Infrastructure Map. Moving now to the strategic planning phase of the HPC, AAP teams need information management support on including AAP in the humanitarian response plan, in designing monitoring indicators, implementing information sharing protocols and data sharing agreements, drafting data management SOPs. Designing indicators to facilitate monitoring of our own performance on collective accountability is usually an area that can be strengthened across the humanitarian responses. Here, you can see a good example from the Central African Republic, where our colleagues have been successfully monitoring their progress since 2009 and 19. Standard operating procedures enable a collective and coherent approach to data management. These documents should include tools, steps, and roles and responsibilities to ensure responsible data management at every stage of the activity. Partners should develop these jointly to ensure feasibility and ensure staff are familiar with the SOPs at all times. Information sharing protocols are documents that are established at the country level. They include a classification table that indicates the level of sensitivity of the types of data and information that is shared in a response, and according to this level, also determines through which channels it will be shared and with whom. This can help streamline data sharing among humanitarians while limiting the dissemination of more sensitive data. The Interagency Standing Committee has developed templates to facilitate the operationalization of these documents, as shown on the screen. You can also see examples of the application of the templates. An SOP for the humanitarian hotline in Northwest Syria on the left, and the information sharing protocol from Afghanistan on the right. On the resources mobilization phase of the HPC, the emphasis is not so much on products and tools as it is on guaranteeing that the right human resources and technologies are available to support quality programming. This includes specialized information management officers, recognizing that different IMOs have different strengths. One might be well versed in ArcGIS, but not on Power BI. Other might be an expert in Power BI, but not on SQL databases, and so on and so forth. To support AAP, we look for IMOs familiar with information provision and data collection tools, as well as community feedback mechanisms and dashboards. Digital solutions procurement, facilitating the selection and acquisition of the necessary digital technology and tools to implement the collective AAP systems, is also a key component of the resource mobilization. And lastly, compliant vendor contracting, safeguarding that any vendor and technology complies with the strictest data protection and information security standards. To do so, we have standard templates for information management officers, TORs, for AAP working groups, technology mappings, and vendor compliance checklists, such as the ones shown here. The implementation and monitoring phase of the HPC is the phase that requires more information management support, namely on 5W matrices and activity dashboards, libraries of common messages, information provision systems, media and social media monitoring, rumor, misinformation, disinformation, and hate speech tracking, community feedback mechanisms, and community voices dashboards. Let's look at a few examples. In what pertains to 5Ws, I want to share the examples from South Sudan and Niger. In South Sudan, our colleagues developed a 5Ws dedicated to the Community Engagement Working Group, as well as its associated Power BI dashboard. In Niger, our colleagues incorporated AAP questions within the different clusters 5Ws, thus capturing how AAP is being mainstreamed across the response. Ideally, both approaches would be in place in every context. To illustrate the variety of AAP-related insights that can be visualized through dashboards, here are a few more examples, this time from Ethiopia, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. Now, you might have noticed that community feedback mechanisms, also known as grievances, complaints, or redress mechanisms, popped up in different phases of the HPC. This happens with other tools, but CFMs are the most complex. Unfortunately, we won't have time to cover everything today, but we will plan a dedicated deep dive on CFMs for 2024. So I will just show a couple of examples of community feedback analysis and visualization, the last step of the feedback loop. The first two examples from Nigeria and Yemen are aggregations of feedback trends from several agency-level feedback mechanisms operating in those respective contexts. Nigeria on the left and Yemen on top. The third one is an example from Afghanistan, and this is a live dashboard of the Awaz collective CFM that is operating in Afghanistan. I'm not sure if Manon is sharing the links, but all the links are on the presentation, and the presentation will be shared afterwards.
Yes, Pedro, all the links are included in the chat.
Thank you so much, Manon. So the last tool I wanted to talk to you about in regards to the implementation and monitoring phase are the Community Voices dashboards. Community Voices dashboards, as the name indicates, also intend to disseminate the views of the communities, but the source of their data is usually perception surveys and not the voluntarily community feedback. So the source of the data is not the community feedback systems where people go voluntarily to provide feedback. It's rather people that are surveyed and asked questions about their opinions and views and perceptions. On the screen, you can see another example from Afghanistan on one of these Community Voices dashboards. On the last phase of the HPC, operation review and evaluation, there are two information management tools that can support AAP: the perception surveys and the Interagency Standing Committee results tracker. Perception surveys are usually conducted by third-party independent organizations, such as Ground Truth Solutions. The example from Burkina Faso on the left. In the perception survey, samples of the population are asked, broadly speaking, about their satisfaction with the aid that they have received. Another tool that is currently under development by the Interagency Standing Committee Task Force on Accountability to Affected People to support the evaluation of the collective AAP performance is this IASC results tracker. It is an evaluation framework composed of 47 indicators distributed across the 9 core humanitarian standards from the CHS Alliance. The indicators include system-level metrics as well as community-level perceptions. And the idea is that this would be applied on a regular basis across the different responses to support HCs and HTTs to measure and course correct in terms of collective accountability. So here you can see the example for the core commitment 1 and the different indicators that were designed specifically to measure the performance in regards to this core commitment. We could not talk about information management and AAP without talking about data responsibility. When we talk about data responsibility, we talk about the safe, ethical, and effective management of data, information, and knowledge. People have rights when it comes to data, and upholding and protecting these rights is fundamental to AAP as a rights-based approach. Rights to privacy and data protection, and rights to erase personal data, for example. Responsible data management is critical to ensuring that AAP activities do not harm affected people, and it is an integral part of fulfilling the commitments related to accountability. Let's remind ourselves that this is not a theoretical exercise. Failing to protect people's data can lead to harm and is a violation of people's rights. The work around data responsibility is based on two principal resources: the IASC operational guidance on data responsibility and the OCHA specific data responsibility guidelines, both on screen. Both of them outline principles, specific actions, and tools for the implementation of data responsibility in humanitarian action. These are for all staff, not just the IMOs. Everyone has an important role to play. In addition, we have also developed, together with the data responsibility team at the Center for Humanitarian Data, a specific guidance note on data responsibility and AAP, which details the actions and tools to ensure data responsibility in AAP-related data management activities. The ISC operational guidance and OCHA guidelines outline 8 actions to improve data responsibility. The guidelines have easy-to-follow guidance and templates for use. All of the actions for data responsibility are equally important, but we will take a look at 3 in particular, which are key to collective AAP. The data impact assessment is to identify and mitigate the risks and benefits of a specific data management activity. It is a proactive way to anticipate potential harm and to adapt an activity ahead of time to mitigate these risks. This should be done, for example, ahead of the deployment of any community feedback mechanism or information provision platform. The second is designing for data responsibility. This means thinking through the guiding principles while we design our tools, to include considerations around data responsibility while we are setting up those tools. It is much harder to retrofit data responsibility when something is established. In practice, this includes privacy by design and data minimization techniques to promote a coherent and responsible approach to data management. The third principle I would like to show is data sharing agreements, which are also critical as they outline the terms for responsible data sharing. They are particularly important when sharing personal or sensitive data, as the agreements will outline the measures that need to be put in place to minimize risks for data subjects. Again, this is critical for collective accountability because agencies and partners cannot share data with each other unless we have adequate data sharing agreements agreed upon and signed by all partners involved. In OCHA's data responsibility guidelines, you can find step-by-step instructions on how to develop these, to involve, as well as templates for staff to adapt to their context. And now I will hand over the floor to my dear colleague Joseph Adawe, who will share how we put these concepts and tools into practice in different humanitarian responses in the Philippines. Joseph, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you with that. Thank you again, colleagues, for this opportunity. My name is Joseph Adawe, the National IMO for OCHA Philippines. So I'm going to quickly present to you some of the examples that we've been doing over the past years. So over the past years, the community engagement / accountability to affected people, community community of practice here in the Philippines has been active, and IM has always been integrated to their activities, and I will show later their membership and their focus. And one of the main driving force of strong and active COP from the different agencies, the Red Cross, even the private sector, um, is having a strong collaboration. And over the years, they have conducted the pre-crisis information mapping and consultation. And the two most notable products that they have produced is on the pre-crisis survey for earthquake and the pre-crisis survey for a tropical cyclone and floods. Going to the presentation, the pre-crisis information survey is a survey to understand the preferences and capacities of communities in relation to those two shock emergencies. And among the IM support that we have provided is in terms of the form, in the data consolidation and cleaning and the analysis, dashboard infographics, and of course the finalization of the report. Here are some examples of the products we produce for the survey report. The output of these products were used as references in the succeeding years in the development of response plans, especially when we had tropical cyclone response plans in the previous years. And as you can see, some examples or notable example of this was that cash was already one of the top 5 preferred aid of the communities. And you can see that when the communities prefer cash, they would use it for transport, noting that this is, for example, for an earthquake. And this is just some of the examples. That there are like a ton of all these infographics. And it was noted that cash was already one of the top 5 preferred aid of the communities. And in those, they have noted, the communities have noted that 20% of, or more than 20% of those cash is planned for transport expenses, noting that this is for a potential earthquake disaster. In this slide is a rapid information communication and accountability assessment, where we normally would conduct in every emergency. So the Philippines experience on a regular basis or even an annual basis tropical cyclones, some earthquakes, and even volcanic eruptions. And in those, we would normally or the community of practice would conduct RICAA. And in those RICAA, we would support providing the forms, data consolidation, analysis, and the report. We would normally provide infographics or dashboards that comes in online or even in PDF formats. Yes, this is as previously mentioned by Pedro. This is one of the examples also for in the case for the Philippines, where we have developed our own AAP/CE 3W or 5W. It is collected separately from the generic 3W from the clusters, and it includes some indicators that are not normally available in the generic 3W. And we would normally provide a PDF dashboard that's posted in Relief Web and an online infographic, the visualization. And this is just an example of the recent one where we had in 2022. As mentioned earlier also by Pedro, the community of practice conducted a lot of preparedness and response activities, capacity and presence. You would see here a map of the Philippines and the regions or areas where partners are present, where they have capacities, and which sector they're working on. And also the other infographic, it shows the relationship of those agencies in relation to the national and the subnational structure. This is an example of an infographic, though it might be a bit colorful, but we try to make it more as visual by providing us um, which sector they are working on in terms of community engagement slash AAP. As you can see, there are around 50 organizations, and this already includes, as mentioned earlier, the UN agencies, INGOs, CSOs, FBOs, the private sectors, and those private sectors already includes two of the biggest telcos in the Philippines. So they have been active or and have been coordinating in any HCT or ICCG response. And finally, this is one of the examples that Pedro has shown, where in terms of the Philippines, we produce also the community voices, though it's not a dashboard, but it's a publication where we provided support in terms of the layout, in terms of the infographics, and in terms of the collection and processing of the data. In the recent event of Typhoon Rai in 2022, we produced the community voices publication twice in a span of 5 months. Yeah, that's it. That's more or less our experience from the Philippines. Over to you, Pedro. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. That's invaluable. Thank you so much. So we would now move to the Q&A session. I will hand over to Manon.
Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Joseph, for this insightful presentation. Let's move on to the Q&A session. Roberto, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Thanks, Joseph and Pedro, for your insights. As from the regional office in West and Central Africa, we tried to develop a mapping of the different mechanisms that were in the region, and we saw that they were quite different one to each other. And then when it comes to reporting mechanisms or tools that we use for AAP, they are quite different. So there is no standard setup. It's nice to see the example of Joseph, but my question more than for the presenters would be more for FIS. Is there any plan to work towards standard array of tools we could use when we deploy to the field in relation to AAP IM, apart from what you said, the questions on the assessment form, which are already there with the rich colleagues and the UNDAC multi-sector needs assessment. So it's more a question about this. Are there any standards, any plan to move to standards on the AAP tools we're going to use? Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roberto. That's a great question. Indeed, we have been working on standards and global guidance within the Interagency Standing Committee Task Force 2. One of the work streams is specifically dedicated to community feedback mechanisms. And we have been trying to develop a package of guidance that includes community feedback data principles and minimum standards, as well as a set of tools like a common taxonomy tool, a feedback analysis tool, and a feedback action tracker tool. And this is what's in the pipeline right now. But as we progress, the idea is that we will be able to keep standardizing and creating more global guidance to support the field. At the same time, we also recognize that tools need to be adapted to the contexts. So it's very important to keep that flexibility. And in that sense, I guess the best we can do is we have generic templates, and then we are always available to support field offices in developing and adjusting to their context, whatever they need. Hope that answers, Roberto.
Thank you, Pedro.
Yes,
If there's no questions, well, I see there's a new question on the chat, but just to let you know, we would also welcome you to share your experiences So if you'd like to share some product or tool that you have developed in support of AAP, please take the floor.
We have a question is, how can we brainstorm together on ways to ensure that everything we do puts affected people front and center?
Yeah, another great question. Thank you so much. I would say that we are working towards shifting mentalities. And this is something that we have to do with ourselves, and it's something that we have to do internally in order to be able to shift the system entirely. And one of the ways that we are doing this within OCHA particularly is through our AAP community of practice that holds monthly meetings and invites different colleagues and specialists to share their experiences and their best practices in different contexts. And that's the way we have to brainstorm together and to find ways to put affected people front and center in our different responses. So we would welcome everyone to join our community of practice if you are interested. Any more questions? Comments?
As of now, we don't have any more experience sharing or question.
Thank you so much, Mano. Let me just highlight once again that if there's questions in the future with anything related to accountability, inclusion, community engagement, feel free to go to our accountability and inclusion help desk that you can see on the screen. There's a web form, there's an email address, and we have a team of subject matter experts that will answer to you in very short time. You can also reach out directly to me or to the AAP team at the global level. And please join our community of practice. And thank you so much, Manon, for the moderation, and Joseph for your rich experience sharing, and everyone online for joining us today. Thank you so much.
A huge thank you to Pedro, to Joseph for leading this presentation, and a huge thank you to all our audience and all our colleagues for joining us.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.